Hockey Helps the Homeless Durham Region is here. Lace up your skates and join us on April 12th to support Blue Door, Durham Youth Services, and Backdoor Mission. Since 1996, Hockey Helps the Homeless has been leveraging Canada's love for hockey to raise awareness and funds for people experiencing homelessness. By signing up and fundraising, you'll enjoy some fantastic hockey action alongside hockey pros and support our most vulnerable neighbors. Whether you're a player, a fan, or someone who wants to make a difference, join us and together we can create a brighter future for Durham Region. For more details and to sign up to play, volunteer, or sponsor the Durham Region Tournament, visit hockeyhelpsthehomeless.com. Let's make a difference one goal at a time.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Hello, Housers, and welcome to On the Way Home. I am Michael Braithwaite from Blue Door. Blue Door is an organization in York, Peel, and Durham region that has, for the past 42 years, been doing great work in the areas of housing, health, and employment. Check us out at bluedoor.ca to see what our team of 150 people are up to on a day-to-day. We do a lot of innovative and creative stuff. We can't do it without the power of community behind us, and we're lucky to have that. So check us out at bluedoor.ca. A treat of a guest today, someone who's just so passionate and brilliant and has done a ton of research over the years, but now has waded into something new. So we have Erin Dej with us. Erin, of course, worked for the Canadian Observatory of Homelessness for many years. Has done a lot of research around in the area sector of homelessness and housing. Is currently a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University. And today we have her on. She's a returning guest on the pod because of the research, the work that she's done. Today we have her on the pod to talk about a new documentary that she put together with some folks. And it's interesting because she said, and this is what I heard anyways, through our conversations, that you have a lot of research and you don't want that to sit on the shelf. So how do you kind of get people to digest that in a different way instead of just putting out a paper and hoping people read it? And she talked about the documentary. The documentary is focused on helping people understand homelessness in mid-sized cities. And it's called, it's Bridging Divides, Voices of Visions about Homelessness in Mid-Sized Cities, and it's available on YouTube now. Check it out, just available. And they put this together, and they have all sorts of different voices on this because it's trying to open up the conversation around homelessness. So they have a law enforcement officer, a small business owner, a lived expert, someone who's experienced homelessness, and others looking at things through their lens and having these conversations around homelessness, the challenges, the solutions, etc. And that's what Erin talks about in our conversation, the need to kind of encourage these conversations to happen. That, as someone who is concerned about people using or has fears about people experiencing homelessness in their neighborhoods, isn't someone who you say you're a NIMBY person, not my backyard. They simply have concerns and they want to have the conversation to understand, right? And she talks about some examples of where they've had those conversations and people have said, you know what, I had no idea, and they're seeing things a little differently, right? And she talks about how the individuals in the doc are from different backgrounds, but there's a lot of common ground there where they understood each other, and then some spots where they had a difference of opinions, which, hey, that's life, right? We want all opinions at the table. So we talk about the documentary. She's shown it. We talk about the response so far, what her learnings have been, and the hopes for the future for it. It's a great conversation about a very important subject. I encourage everyone to go out on YouTube and check out the documentary and screen it. If you want to screen in your area, let Erin know. She'd be happy to do that. Let's go to that conversation now. Erin, you have been so busy over the last while, and we're going to talk about why. Thanks so much for making the time today to come on the pod.
I'm such a big fan of this podcast. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, you're the one. We found it.
The subscriber, I
am. You've been on before. We've had the pleasure of having you on before. Long time doing a lot of work in this sector, which we're so grateful for, all the work that you do. For those who may not be familiar, can you walk us through a little of your journey into the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I'm a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University, and before that, I was working with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, doing stuff on homelessness prevention. And so over the last, I'd say 5 years, I've really been thinking about what's my role in this sector and what can I contribute. And what I was seeing in my own community that I live in, and the community that I work in, were these mid-sized cities really struggling with the increase in visible homelessness. And so that's not to say that there wasn't always homelessness in mid-sized cities. Of course there was, but it was primarily hidden. It was people sleeping in their cars. It was people couch surfing. And mid-sized cities over the last few years, in particular since the pandemic, have seen a real influx, not only in homelessness overall, but in visible homelessness. And so I really saw this as an opportunity for me to dig into, what's happening here. A lot of the research, I'm an academic, so a lot of the research is done in places like Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, and that's fabulous, but it's not always translates to mid-sized cities that don't have the same capacity, that don't have the same institutional history because they haven't been dealing with this for so long. So that's really the impetus for this, was trying to understand, what's happening in mid-sized cities specifically, and how can we help, because municipalities have been left to their own devices for the most part. How can we help mid-sized cities grapple with and respond meaningfully to the visible homelessness that they're seeing?
So when you talk mid-size, like what size are we talking about, and can you give examples of?
Yeah, so there's a few definitions out there. The one that we're going with is communities ranging in population from 50 to 500,000, which is a pretty big range. The communities that we've been doing this research in, all of them are about 100,000, 100 to 150,000 people.
Yeah, because you'd be looking at, if you're 50, you'd be looking at, say, Aurora all the way to Hamilton.
Yeah.
Right, which is quite different.
Yeah.
Now, I also, for the first time ever on this podcast, not the first time I've messed up, but the first time I've messed up the order of questions, because we always ask, I don't know why I jumped over it. It's the first question we ask everyone, and I don't want to take that away from you, because I'm interested in your answer. And that is, what does home mean to you?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I have been very busy, and things have been really hard, lately for, I think, a lot of us. And so I've been thinking about how home, for me, is the place where I get to fully articulate my emotions. It's where I've been holding in a cry all day. I get to finally come home and cry, or I get to celebrate sort of these milestones with my family, and so we get to have a lot of joy in the house too. It's where somebody might scream into a pillow because they're so frustrated, and things like that. It's where, this is me again, I get to snort laugh at a sitcom or whatever it might be, but I get to experience, and I feel safe enough to have that full range of emotions in my home, and where I don't feel comfortable doing that in public in various spaces. And so I've been thinking about how in encampments, a lot of people don't understand why people might stay in an encampment. That thin piece of canvas, that zipper that you can zip close, as minor as that might be to some people, that's where you get to close that tent, and you get to experience that full range of emotions. You get to express that full range of emotions. You get to put the guard down, the defenses down just a little bit. So that's what I've been thinking about in terms of home, is just having that freedom to really feel what you need to feel.
Yeah, so well said. I just think of, reflecting on what you're saying, like that, the only place to be your true self, right, is when you shut that door or zip up the tent or whatever. You're like, oh, and for whatever reason, when there's others around, we can't either. It's, you can't just be that way because you're at work or society doesn't look well, and to be your true self. And there's so many Canadians that just don't have that, that luxury of actually having that place to be their true self. Now, you were talking about your work in mid-sized cities, and so you've gone to something I don't believe you've done before. You've created a documentary called Bridging the Divides, Voices and Visions About Homelessness in Mid-sized Cities. Let's start from the beginning. How did this even come about? How did you think documentary, this is how I'm got to go about telling the story?
You're absolutely right. I've never done this before, and it was trial by fire in many ways, and a huge learning experience. The impetus for it was Alex Abramovich has done this kind of documentary before, and I saw his documentary in 2017 at a youth homelessness conference, and I loved it And thankfully, Alex was really kind to come on this work with us and walk us through what it takes to create a documentary, introduced us to his wonderful videographer, who we were able to work with as well, Wendy Rowland, to be able to make sure that the research that myself and my team are doing isn't just sitting on a shelf. That's one of the worries or concerns a lot of academics have, and myself included, is how do we make sure this gets out into the world beyond the academic papers that we write. And so this was the goal here, was to be able to have a conversation with the people in the documentary itself, but then to make sure that the documentary is a starting point for other people to have those conversations, for other community members in other mid-sized cities to have a launching point to be able to talk about this really complex and nuanced and hard and messy thing we're going through with the homelessness crisis that we're facing today.
And you did this through, you took, I think, 5 people, right? So you had the voices of 5 individuals. Can you talk about that process? Like how do you go about telling the story within the documentary?
Yeah, so this comes from before we started the documentary, we did research interviews, because we're researchers. We did interviews with 86 people across 3 mid-sized cities in Southern Ontario. And so we talked to people with lived experience of homelessness, service providers, community members, so concerned community members or housed residents, and members of first responders, so bylaw, police, and fire. And so from those 86 interviews, we were able to glean what are the main sticking points, where are these communities really struggling and grappling. And so once we were able to hone in on that, we are so grateful that 5 people were willing to put themselves on video, which is not an easy thing to do, and to be able to have these conversations. And so we found 5 people, so a lived expert, somebody who's precariously housed, a service provider, a small business owner, and a member of law enforcement, who were able to speak to us and be able to talk through us to each other about how they understand homelessness, what they're seeing from their perspective about the crisis, and what they think we should do about it.
It's so cool. It's I love all those different voices, right? And I think we're going to talk about that. And obviously, always agree on everything. But before we talk about that, what did you learn? Like, you went through this process. Were there any surprises along the way? Kind of what were the biggest learnings for you, or you find coming out of this?
Yeah, the biggest learning was how much people actually agreed with each other. We've been doing this research for 5 years, and the 2 iterations of this project have had the word NIMBY in the titles of these projects. And over the last 5 years, I have moved away from using the term NIMBY unless it's the right word to use. Right. Because what I was coming to understand is there are a lot of people who have a lot of fear, who have some truly, valid concerns, who don't understand what's happening and why they're seeing this influx of homelessness in their cities. And that doesn't necessarily mean they hate people who are homeless, that they lack compassion. And so that was the biggest learning from the research and the documentary was, because let's say a business owner doesn't want to clean human feces up every morning, that doesn't mean they hate people who are homeless. And because a neighbor has been verbally assaulted, by somebody who's having a bad day, who's having a hard day, and they're scared now, it doesn't mean they hate people who are homeless. So how do we have those conversations so that we can address quite valid concerns, so that we can validate fears that there may be, while at the same time meaningfully responding to homelessness? So let's kick everybody who's homeless out of my city. That's not going to work. That's not a human rights approach. That's actually not going to solve the problem, because we know that's people aren't going to leave. It's just going to move things over. So what can we do to actually solve it? So in the documentary, you'll see 5 people who come at this from really different perspectives, actually finding a lot of common ground and shared values in terms of understanding the importance of home, understanding the importance of community, wanting to find long-term solutions. The sticking points was, what do we do in the meantime? How do we address this until we get those long-term solutions?
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, and I think so. We've been through it recently at Blue Door. It wasn't our project; it was the Region of York's project in Aurora. And you have, of course, the deputations, people go up in council and to make a planning decision. And unfortunately, it didn't go the way we wanted. But I think I talk a lot about the honesty of what you were just talking about. There is that if we get up there and say this neighborhood is not going to change at all because that's not the truth either. There are going to be some pain points, and there's going to be changes, and but that's not a reason not to do it. But let's talk and not to put words in your mouth, but let's talk through it. I think we have to be careful that we're not making promises that are not real, so they can say, "Aha, I told you." There's a guy here, and this was a little difficult, and there's I'm a little less comfortable. All these things, and to have those conversations. And you're right. And people, there are people that are saying, I'm a little nervous. There's my kids go to school nearby, but they're not saying no. They're just saying, help me understand. And let's have the conversation around that, around those types of fears that are there. And they're legitimate fears sometimes. Same thing with encampments where people are like, listen, I do want everyone to have a home, but I'm scared to go with my kids to that park now because and I had a friend who's very, a good, and he's like, listen, Mike, you're not going to like this, but I'm struggling to bring my kids to the park because there's encampment. I also want them to find housing. And so some people want to be part of the solution. They just need a little guidance too. Absolutely. Of how to get there, right?
I had a really, really powerful moment a couple of years ago where I was spending some time in an encampment that has since been evicted, but was there at the time. And I was there with a few advocates and lived experts, and a housed neighbor came by really angry and was saying all the things we think, a NIMBY person would say. I don't care where they go, just get them out of here. I don't want to see them, all those things. And one of the advocates I was with sat with that person for 45 minutes and talked through everything. So this housed person said, they're going to the bathroom everywhere. And the advocate talked about let me tell you about how far they have to travel to be able to access a bathroom. And let me tell you about the physical health and mobility challenges that some people in this encampment are facing. Oh, well, they use substances. Let me tell you about how we've been trying for years to get a safe consumption site in this community so that they actually have somewhere safe to do that. And 45 minutes of that. And by the end of that 45 minutes, the housed person had done a 180. It was the most shocking thing I've ever seen. The emotional toll it took on the advocate was very real. But I watched somebody whose concerns were validated. Yes, I get that you don't like seeing people use the bathroom. I get that you don't like seeing, people using substances in open. Here's the things we need to do to address that. And the next day, that same house person came over with food and items for the encampment residents. So I know it's possible. I know that with time and patience, people who can come to understand what's happening, and so then can respond differently.
Yeah, I think, it's sad because we're in divisive times now, right? Where I think that reasonableness, you're either in camp A or B, and you can't. And I remember it was through media training, and they talked about, look, let's say take this encampment issue. You have people that they're going to hate. You're never going to bring them around. They've made a decision. Encampments are wrong. They're bad, blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to have people that are, the advocates for people experiencing homelessness. And no matter what happened, we have to do it. And just, they're there. And so it's the people in the middle that we're just talking about that. And they say, this is where you spend your time, having the conversations like the advocate did in the park where someone's saying, educate me, help me understand. Here's my concern. I mean, if you're open to it, right, you can have those conversations. And I hope that we get back to a world where we can have more of those conversations moving forward, and documentaries like yours open up those conversations, as you said before. Any surprises as you did this work? I mean, how long did it take start to finish?
Oh, what a great question. I would say a year and a half, probably. So it was a lot of work, because one of the important points of this kind of documentary, which is called a broker dialogue, is that us, the researchers, do the interviews with the participants, and then we share that with their permission. We share the clips with each other, and then they respond back to those clips. So that the lived expert isn't in the room with the law enforcement officer who that might not be as safe, or it might not. There's a power dynamic there that is important to recognize. So it was through us that we brokered that dialogue, and an important part of that was that the participants had complete power over what was shared, that we wouldn't put anything in that documentary that they hadn't greenlit. And so it takes some time to watch the different clips of each other, to approve your own clips, to approve the final thing. But I think that that's really important to be able to do this work, especially because there were lived experts as part of our participants. And so making sure in the light of nothing about us without us, we make sure that they're in a space that they're comfortable to put that forward. But the lived experts, but I would also say the business owner in particular in this film, put herself out there and put her business out there in a way that took a lot of courage. And so I was surprised that we were able to honestly get a law enforcement officer and a business owner to speak to us, but also that they came at this with compassion. One of the other pieces that really surprised me was how much of the conversation was about stigma. And so the lived expert in our documentary is an incredible person named Simon, who I care about very much, and we've been working together for quite some time. And he does an incredible job in the documentary, really articulating what it's like to experience that shame, that loss of dignity. He talks about hopelessness in a very important way. And the other participants in the documentary really got that, really understood what it's like when we objectify people who are homeless as they're all the same, they're all the same, that they must be, insert whatever stereotype you want to insert here, how damaging that is to people. And so when we tell people who are homeless, why don't you just get a job? Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? I think that understanding of what that hopelessness does to people, what it does to somebody's soul, really came through in this documentary. And I thought people were going to get really nuts and bolts, right? I thought it was going to be about tax dollars and things like that. And it was to a certain extent, but people really understood and were able to think through their own sense of how they would feel when it comes to stigma. So that was one of the big surprises too.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We've had so many different guests. Guy Felicello was on, and he died on the streets 6 times, got brought back, and talk about stigma. I recently there's a professional hockey player who made the NHL and then hurt his knee and got hooked on oxy from the doctor, and then ended up on the streets of downtown Vancouver. And he tells a story about how he used to be very judgmental of, oh, that would never be me, and then he was on the streets doing that and saying that, it wasn't just you were experiencing homelessness, you were no longer human because people didn't even see you anymore, right? Very gut-wrenching stuff when they say that, right? So it is that hopelessness for sure, and that, for people to understand that, to say, no matter what someone's going through. And I've seen it in Toronto, just a while back, my wife and I were downtown, and someone was face down on the sidewalk, and it was like ants going around the person, like they weren't there. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, how inhuman have we become where this is no longer a problem? A few people would kind of look and then move on, but that it was normal to have someone, a human, clearly in distress, with people not really stopping to think about it, right? And again, this is not supposed to be a real downer, listeners, but this is that human aspect of homelessness, and when you put faces to it. Erin, I often talk, when I go and do talks, because I'll say, what does homelessness look like? And most adults won't, I say, will never answer, right? Because they don't want to say the wrong thing. When I ask younger kids, they always describe me, right? To my face, right? So, right, because they're talking about an older guy with a beard, especially when my beard's bigger. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's what but it's what they're seeing on the streets of downtown Toronto, right? They're not, again, they're just being honest kids, right? But we often talk about, it's not a look, it's a feeling, and hopelessness being one of those feelings as well. So what has the reaction been so far? So you've got the doc, has it been out? You've showed it to some audiences. What have you heard?
Yeah, so we were able to do public screenings in the communities that we had been doing this research in. So that was my November, and it was absolutely incredible. It was over 100 people at each screening. At the last one we did, we actually had to change the venue with 24 hours to go because the interest in the screening was so big. And for each of the screenings, we had a panel afterwards, a panel discussion with lived expertise and local voices and researchers to be able to work together to talk this through. So really overwhelming the positive response that we've had to the documentary. I think there are people with lived experience of homelessness who have said that they really see themselves in that. And then there are people who have never really thought about homelessness very much until they came to this screening and have said that they really had their eyes open, which is just, again, as somebody who wants to make sure, my research does something is such a beautiful thing to say. So I think it really helped people who didn't know very much about homelessness to, again, have a foray into having these conversations. Something really incredible that happened a couple of weeks after one of the screenings is my co-lead on the research, Carrie Sanders. She was at her gym, and her gym had actually recently been broken into, and some coats and boots were stolen from, I guess, the front lobby. And initially, the gym had put up a social media post about how people, somebody who's homeless had done this. And it wasn't Carrie, it was other people who go to the gym who had attended the screening who sent messages saying, you can't say that. We don't know that it was somebody who's homeless. And what does that do? What stigma does that create when we assume and we identify, petty theft or things like that as supposedly, or assume that it's somebody who's homeless. So to see people not only sort of absorb the documentary, but actually take action is just so exciting. The other reaction that we have had is recognizing that this research is about visible homelessness. That's been our focus. What that means, though, when we talk about visible homelessness is we're not talking so much about hidden homelessness. And so that is a missing piece to this that we need to pay attention to is we know that what gets seen gets the policies, for better or for worse anyway, but it gets the policies, gets the investment, gets things done. And it means that certain groups of people and certain people who are part of the hidden homeless get ignored. And so recognizing that as part of the conversation has also been like an important reaction and learning to the documentary.
That's so cool. Let me tell you, so I want to tell you, in Aurora, when that vote did not go the way, here's the silver lining out of that. There was a number of residents that were in attendance that were embarrassed and said, wow, I'm embarrassed in my town. And then they formed this group called Aurora Cares. And they have now 450 people in this group that are advocates, and they're hungry to learn, right? So they got together and they did a screening of the film Uncharitable, which is a brilliant film. But this is it's a mid-sized city, barely scrapes in there, I think. A little small, but 68,000. But this is the kind of, like this, you're saying there's an appetite out there for people who are saying to me, we want more information. We don't know. We want to learn. And they would be hungry to know, to learn about what have I been doing to stereotype and what have I been, thinking that's not quite right, et cetera. So I think there's going to be, what are next steps for your doc? Like, what do you want? Where do you want to take it?
So what we're doing is, I was actually yesterday in a high school where we showed the documentary to a grade 10 class and two grade 12 classes. And so we've actually put in a grant application to turn the documentary into curriculum development. So fingers crossed, anyways, if anybody's listening who's a funder, help us out there. But yeah, we want to be able to use this, again, as a jumping off point, but to talk to young people about these issues so that from early on, there's an understanding of what's going on here. We actually had several young people at the community public screenings that we did. And I got messages from parents saying that they had conversations at the dinner table that they've never had with their kids before, because they were able to talk about this in a really specific way, because they had examples of what to be able to talk about. And my own daughter came to, she hears about homelessness all the time. She can't get away from it. But she came to the documentary and she was able to talk to her friends at school about this and about what she was hearing and seeing. So we're really excited about the opportunity to be able to build up on this, to be able to bring it into schools. We also want to do private screenings with different groups. So we're thinking things like city council, BIAs, even somebody gave us a suggestion of like trail associations and people, that kind of thing. Because one of the things we did learn from these public screenings is we think that some folks who might have had difficult things to say maybe didn't feel like they could say it in this really open venue. And that's understandable. I get that. So we want to be able to create some private screenings where we can say some of these things and talk some of these things through in a safe place to do that. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in the new year is again, not shy away from these really tricky conversations. I know that it's been said on this podcast and I've said it and people say it all the time, solving homelessness is tricky, but solving homelessness is actually simple. And I want to dig into that tricky part though. I want to, that people and talking about emotions, people's feelings and perspectives can be barriers to being able to get that simple solution done. But as you've just described, it can also be incredible mobilizers. And so, going back to part of the learnings that you asked, one of the things I've learned from these mid-sized cities is there is a huge group of people who just don't know. And once they know, are going to be those allies and those advocates that we really need. Or at the very least, they won't stop things from happening.
Yeah.
I get people are busy. I understand that you're not going to this isn't going to become your cause necessarily, and you're going to devote, hours of your week to this. But if you just don't go to city council and delegate against, a supportive housing being built or things like that, that's actually an incredibly helpful thing in and of itself. Just what people don't do.
Well, I, for one, super excited to see it and what you're saying because, Erin, to be honest, so I work in 2 municipalities right now, and a third we work a little in Peel that have multiple cities. And the counselors there, many of them are part-time, and I often get calls of really eager and willing saying, help me understand. This is what I'm hearing from a resident. I don't know. I don't have the knowledge. So I think a documentary like yours, the research of the film, can really help them, councils, to understand that. And I will reach out to you after this because I've got a couple that actually it's right on point. One in the north that said we need some help helping people understand, and they're wanting to understand, like council wise, help us. What are the tools? I think this is a brilliant tool. I love the curriculum piece. I always say to my team, they're like, "Why are you going to a grade 5 classroom?" I'm like, because if that teacher in that class cares enough to listen to me babble on about, and one kid has that conversation at home and learns at the age of 8 that this is not what we all thought it was until the age of, well, some people forever, but you know what I mean? I think it starts younger, and these are the individuals too that are going to make the change in the future that we want to see, right?
Yeah, I think, a couple of things on that. Over the last 5 years doing this work, a lot of the times I hear, politicians, often it's like you're saying local part-time city councilors, but politicians need to be bold and brave and make the right, human rights approach to responses. And I'm all for that. And I think that that's very true. At the same time, what I've come to think about is that politicians will do what gets them votes. That's it. If compassionate, meaningful, human rights oriented responses will get them votes, they'll do that for the most part. And if punitive enforcement, aggressive responses will get them votes, often they'll do that. So I actually think it's on us as the voting members, as constituents, to let our representatives know, well, actually we'll vote for you if you do the right thing here, if you provide meaningful responses to homelessness. So politicians need to do it, but we also need to let them know that they'll get our vote, and we need a strong hold of people who will vote for that as well. So I put it, similar to the business owner. So a lot of these business owners, and it's in the documentary, talk about, they're compassionate to the person who's homeless, who's on their front step, but people won't come into their business. And so what are they? And so we can say that business owner is NIMBY. We can say that business, but as long as customers won't come in, if customers were willing to come in anyway, I bet you half the time the business owners wouldn't.
No. Listen.
Get the customers in.
We run out of the cold program, and at 7 a.m. they have to leave. Right. So this was before. And so we would give them gift cards to Tim Hortons. So they go to Tim Hortons and they take over. And that business owner was a wonderful person. It was like, I don't want to be that guy, but they're shutting down my store. Like they're shutting, and can you help me? And he was right. So we did. So now, you know what, that gave us the research we needed and data to say we need to do a daytime warming center. Because we want to keep we are a valued part of this community. We respect our neighbors. This isn't fair to them. And he loved that and is now an advocate, right? Like, but you could see he's not wrong. He's not a bad person for saying that. And he's telling you the truth, that his business is actually suffering. And that, tells us that we needed to do something different.
Sorry to interrupt you. I love that you brought that up, though, because actually that's what's in the documentary. So where I say they mostly agreed and it was all kind of nice, where there was still tension, and you'll see in the documentary, is the business owner we interviewed is a coffee shop owner. And so you'll see the service provider in the documentary talks about how they give, when everything else is closed, they give coffee shops to gift cards to coffee shops. And the business owner says, I'm not trained. This is not what this is meant to be. I'm trying to make some money, which I think is fair. I can't be a drop-in center. And so they kind of that isn't resolved by the end of the documentary because they're stuck between the rock and a hard place. Yeah. The service provider gets what the business owner is saying, but is saying, I literally have nowhere else for them to go on Sundays, when the library is closed, or whatever, a holiday or whatever it might be. And the business owner saying, I get you, but I can't run my business. My business won't work that way. So this is where that can be a conversation starter for other communities because, they didn't agree in the end, but they understood where each other was coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I've way too often now used the whole, perfect is the enemy of good, I believe the quote is. And then when I saw the Blackberry movie, out of Waterloo, of course, but the response to that, he said that good enough is the enemy of humanity. And I love that quote because the coffee shop is like, we have nowhere else, the sleeping bag or the tent, because even our out of the cold programs are not housing, they're temporary. Like it's all in a responsive kind of good enough way. And that is the enemy of humanity because humanity does not, get better if we're just good enough. Right. So this documentary is perfect, better than good enough. You're doing great work, and we want people to see it. Where can people go, and also where can people go to support it? I mean, these things don't fund themselves, so they wanted to support it. They want to see it. They want a screening in their community. How can they get in touch?
Yeah, so as of today, actually, we made it public on YouTube. And so I had to let my baby go, right? And there was a little talk about tears. There was a little bit of that, but it's really important that it can be out there in the public so it can do what it needs to do. So if folks Google or on YouTube put in Bridging the Divide, they'll be able to find the trailer and then they'll find the full documentary there as of today. And then this is what I love to do. I'm so happy to come to communities and whether virtually or in person and talk people through this, do those conversations afterwards. So people can reach out to me at any time. I have a very Googleable name. I'm the only Erin Dej in the world, as far as I know. So if they put me in, they'll find my email address to reach out to me.
Very cool. Well, listen, thank you for all you do. This is brilliant. I think, it always takes a variety of mediums. You look beyond like this great research. How do we make it kind of digestible to a different audience too, right? How do we get it out there? And I think this is brilliant and a great way to do it through storytelling and sharing. So thank you so much for all you do. I hope people go see this. Check it out on YouTube, and I'll be following up myself with some ideas. I want to connect you to some people that this is really going to help them as we try to prevent homelessness, I think, across the country, especially in mid-sized cities. Thank you so much, Erin.
I love that. Talk about mediums that make change. This podcast is a medium that's changed my life and my work, and I know for many other people. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Well, you're always welcome back. Anything you do, you let us know. You're welcome back on the pod.
Famous last words. I'm going to show up every week and just sit here.
It's okay. Until then, have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time on the way home.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.